How's it going, folks? Stu here. Grief. A feeling of intense sorrow, usually from someone dying. Might not be the happiest of topics today, folks, but grief, it's a universal emotion, right? I think it's safe to say we've all gone through it and felt it at some point in our lives. I mean, heck, I feel it every time I'm in Lidl at the tills. Am I right? Good grief, Carol. Slow down. I've only got 2 hands and 1 bag. But some of you might have just finished that little WandaVision TV series on Disney Plus, and you might have thought to yourself, that... me thinks that looks a little bit like grief. And you'd be right. I think quite a subtle theme on the show there, wasn't it? Immediately already failed at literally the one note I had on this video, which was don't be a snob to Marvel. Look, I'm sorry, all right? It was too easy. Joke's on you, though. Didn't even write that note at all. It was all for the bit. The bit was in the notes, though, as well, though. I've got that. Look, WandaVision, it was a show. It was pretty solid, and it used grief as a springboard into eventually just people with special powers floating into the clouds and punching each other again. It did, however, get me thinking a lot about other instances of art exploring grief, because it's a common theme. There's a lot to mine from it. Who'd have thunk? So I have compiled a handful of films specifically about grief that I thought all do interesting things for that topic that it might be worth sharing, as everyone's got grief on their minds. So if you just finished WandaVision and you're thinking, I just want to watch films about grief, and that is it now, then I guess you're in luck. Come on in. We're talking about bloody grief, my guys. It's gonna be an absolute fucking party in here for the next 5 minutes. He says sarcastically. Manchester by the Sea. Straight in. I'm not here to fuck around. If you've not seen Manchester by the Sea, it is a heavy time. Not gonna argue it. But it is honestly one of the most accurate portrayals of the grieving process that comes to mind when I think about the topic of grief. It is essentially a drama about a man that is asked to go and help support his brother's son when his brother died, his son's uncle. There was an easier way of describing that somewhere, I just didn't find it. I love this film's patience and the way it soaks itself in the mundane aspects of the grieving process, because I think often in films the themes of grief and the grieving process can be heightened to certain degrees in order to keep someone's attention, to keep you engaged as viewers, which I'm not saying is innately a bad thing, but it's always nice when you see films that just take the time to look at things naturally, how they would happen in life. In Manchester by the Sea is Exhibit A in the mundanity of people going through grief. And there's a certain awkwardness that comes from the grieving process, but also from everyone around you and the way they interact with someone that's going through the grieving process. And this film taps into that awkwardness so well. It does mean that it's quite a slow watch. It does mean that I don't think it's going to be for everyone, but I think there's a lot to soak up in terms of its accurate reflection of reality. But next on this list, and naturally I'm immediately becoming very aware of the fact this list, it's not going to get any less heavy, sorry, but it's David Lowry's A Ghost Story, which is a 2017 film about a ghost in a ghost sheet going through the world. And there's a worry that this film would just, I don't know, be a little bit just kind of quirky style over everything else, and for a lot of people to watch it, no doubt you kind of felt that in the end. But I genuinely think A Ghost Story is one of the better films of the last decade. I'm saying it. This film is one of the most absorbing and just rich atmospheric looks at grief, and it's its simplicity which really draws me to it. Just following a ghost in its most literal cartoon sense of just a bedsheet going around places, and seeing its relationship with environments, with memories. It's a really interesting, fluid look through time and memory. I find that so interesting, and it's so creatively and engagingly explored, this film. Also, Rooney Mara eats a pie in it for maybe 10 minutes interrupted. It feels like longer. If that isn't the most accurate portrayal of grief, just wanting to eat a pie on your own, then I don't know what it is. Some people might watch that scene and go, why are we watching Rooney Mara eat a pie for this long? And those people, I don't want anything to do with you. But the next film on the list is one that I haven't seen for a while. I kind of forgot that it was as amazing as it was, and that is Mary and Max, which is a wonderful animated film from, I think it's like a decade old now, which is a while. It's a claymation film, which I don't really want to say too much about because I think it's best experienced blind without knowing too much about it going in. That's how I watched it, and it was just a wonderful surprise in that sense. It's just a really sort of gentle and honest look at certain emotions and the theme of grieving and going through that process, specifically in relation to a relationship, you know, learning about someone. It's got a really charming feel to it, and I like the way that animation can be used so expertly to look through those emotions. It reminds me a little bit of something like, I guess, Up, which is the go-to animated film everyone thinks of when they're like, that surprise film that was animated and you didn't expect it to be as deep as it was and it makes you cry within the first 10 minutes. That first 10 minutes of Up, it's like, Mary and Max is just like that for an hour and a bit, which sounds horrible and like you wouldn't want to put yourself through it. But I promise you, it's not entirely the heaviest thing ever. Philip Seymour Hoffman is the voice of the guy, so you shouldn't need to know anything else. I love Mary and Max. I haven't seen it in far too long. What am I doing? Why am I I should be watching Mary and Max right now, but I'm not. And I'll tell you why. It's because I've got a few more ruddy films up my sleeve, haven't I? Hereditary. Yep. That's on the list. If you've not seen Hereditary, it is one of the most deeply unsettling experiences I've maybe ever had in a cinema, which I promise you is a positive. It's a horror film, and horror, I think, is one of those genres which is so ripe for exploring themes from the real world and real emotions that we all go through, but in a very heightened way. I love that about the horror genre, and horror films that tap into that really well. Yes, please, sign me the fuck up. Hereditary does that in grief so effectively that, as I said, it's horrible. It's basically about a family that are grieving the loss of their grandma, and they have not a good time with that process. The horror all comes from really grounded things, even though a lot of the story and where it ends up going is a very, I don't know, like horror kind of it's not supernatural, but you know what I mean? Like the horror side of the story is still there, but the things that are actually deeply unsettling are real things, like loss, losing people, losing loved ones. It is an incredibly extreme look at characters' emotional reactions to grief, and it is so effective for that. Honestly, cracking film, but very horrible to watch. Tough. If you're not into horror films, skip it. If you want an even wilder time, why not do a double bill of this and Ari Aster's second film, Midsummer, which will ruin you as a person. I did think about including that one in the list, and I guess I just have, haven't I? It's in there. The final film on the list from me was one which always comes to mind when I think about grief, and that is Me and Earl and the Dying Girl. The hints in the name, I guess. I loved Me and Earl and the Dying Girl so much when I first saw it. I had such a reaction to that film, which has never really left me. I just love it. I just think it's so good. It is exactly my kind of film. It is on paper a kind of typical young adult story of a teenager and his girlfriend who has a terminal illness. It's been done a lot, and I don't want you to let that put you off this film. Trust me, it's very unique in what it does explore and what it does say. But I love this film in the way that it isn't afraid to use humor in much the same way we all use humor when we deal with trauma, when we deal with grief in our own lives. It is natural. It is what we all do. Humor is as much a part of the grieving process as sadness and sorrow, I think personally. But it also is very moving as well off the backhand of that. And I think the humor makes the things that are more moving in the film more moving in the film. One of its main lessons and one of its main themes is that you don't really stop learning about someone even when they're not with you anymore. And so if you're still learning new things about someone after they're gone, are they really gone? Like, they're still a part of your life. And I find that to be such a frankly beautiful message. I find it incredibly moving, and I love that way of approaching this theme and this topic of grief. Not to, you know, where other films have done, focus so much on the sorrow and the actual immediacy of the grieving process, but you know, to look forward, to look past that and look at all of, I guess, the positives that come from the grieving process. So I wanted to end on that one because I think it's not all about just sitting and being sad and the sorrow of going through grief. It's also about getting past that, you know, and that's as much a part of the grieving process as the initial sorrow. I find that to be an incredibly powerful, moving way to think of things, I think, and it's what's helped me get through a lot of grieving moments in my life, and I hope that watching a film like Me and Earl and the Dying Girl and any of the other films on this list helps you go through any of those emotions that you might happen to be going through, I don't know, or maybe, as I said, you just want to watch films about grief. I mean, it's an incredibly human topic, and if this list is any indication, it makes for incredible cinema along the way. So yeah, those are my 5, I think, main suggestions for films about grief if you just came off the back of WandaVision and you're thinking, I want to see more about that theme. There are obviously many more films that deal with the topic of grief in many different ways. They might not be on this list, and you may be going, Stu, what the hell are you doing without insert film title here in this list, huh? What are you doing? So let me know any films that you think of when you think of grief in cinema in the comments down below. Might be the saddest comment section we've ever seen, but let's just savor that, I think. But I hope these have been some good suggestions for you guys. Not always the easiest films, so, you know, take your time with them. Don't watch them all in one night. You might get PTSD. I'll see you guys soon for some more thoughts on some more films, because gosh darn it, you better believe I've been seeing some. Until next time, stay beautiful, stay safe, try and think of happy things, like when you order nuggets and there's an extra one in the pack than you expected. It's the little things.